We are live, Chair.
Great. And my laptop just moved to 8:30. Good morning and welcome to the February 4th Thurston Regional Planning Council meeting. I'm Clark Gilman and I am acting chair until we get to agenda item 7 and elect officers, whereupon I will hand over the virtual gavel. So that's the meeting called to order, and we have Mark is going to run us through the introductions of board members, and Vina will run through the staff for us.
Okay, will do. First, Chair Gilman, one small piece of bad news. You're acting chair through this meeting. The new officers take office at the close of the gavel on this meeting. So thank you for serving today.
I'll hide my disappointment.
All right. That doesn't mean you get to close the meeting right after the elections.
So I'll just run through the member list, and when your entity is called, just introduce yourself. So City of Lacey.
Hi, I'm Robin Vasquez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm newly elected to the City of Lacey. Oh,
Thurston County. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Thurston County.
Gary Edwards.
All right. City of Rainier.
Dennis McVeigh. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
City of Tenino.
Great city of Tenino.
Yes.
John O'Callahan representing the great city of Tenino.
City of Yelm.
Joe DeCanto.
And Nisqually Indian Tribe.
David Isle here.
Good morning. North Thurston Public Schools.
Gretchen Maliska.
Tumwater School District. You're muted, Mel, but it's. Oh, Mel's microphone seems to be off, but Mel Murray representing Tumwater School District. Olympia School District.
Hillary Seidel, Board of Directors. I think we have staff here today too.
Frank Wilson, Executive Director of Operations.
Good morning. Intercity Transit.
Carolyn Cox. Everybody.
Lacey Fire District 3.
Rick Kelly.
Port of Olympia.
Port Commissioner Bob Io here.
Good morning. And Evergreen State College.
Scott Morgan.
And Timberland Regional Library.
Cheryl Haywood, good morning.
Okay, doing a quick scan to see if anyone joined as I was started. I don't believe so. Anyone that I have not called? All right, thank you. And Vina will introduce staff for us.
Yes, from Intercity Transit, we have Ann Freeman Manzanares and Jessica Gould. From Thurston County, we have Nat Unzelman. From Lacey, we have Martin Hoppy. From Tumwater, we have Mary Heather Ames. Frank Wilson introduced himself from OSD. And I believe from North Thurston Public Schools, Dean, you're also here. So, yeah, great. And then from TRPC, you've met Mark Daly, our Executive Director, and I'm Vina Tabbitt, the Deputy Director here. We also have Berlina Lucas, Dave Reed, Karen Parkhurst, Katrina Van Every, Paul Brewster, Amy Hatch-Winnica, and Veronica Jarvis. Is there anyone I missed? Okay, thank you.
All right, next up is an approval of the agenda. I'm hoping that you found the link and had access to the packet. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda for this morning's meeting.
So when John O'Callahan.
Gary Edwards, second.
Terrific. We've got John O'Callahan making the motion, Gary Edwards seconding it. All those in favor of approving the agenda as published, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. We have an agenda for today. Next up is the consent calendar. And These are items that were either presented at a previous meeting or are routine in nature, primarily paying the bills. They are action items, and I would entertain a motion to approve today's consent calendar.
So entertain, John O'Callahan.
Edwards, second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the consent calendar and paying the bills, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, we have approved the consent calendar. And that moves us to our first other business item, which is the calendar for 2022. Mark is going to share his screen.
Yes, so on your screen, you're seeing the proposed calendar for 2022. The blue boxes on the first Friday of the month are what are the proposed dates for council meetings. In the past, we pointed out ones that are somewhat close to a holiday to see if council wants to consider having the meeting on a different Friday. In looking at that, the ones that we noticed as staff, really it's mostly July 1st would be the meeting, which is at the start of the July 4th holiday. In the past and in September, the meeting is before Labor Day holiday. The past few years, the council has voted to go ahead and keep the meetings on those dates, but that is primarily what would be open for discussion. And then just a reminder that in January 2023, in the past few years, we've been having the meeting on the second Friday because that gives us a little more time to close out our books for the previous year so that we can give a more complete financial picture for year-end close. So I will pass it back to you, Chair, and we'll have any discussion and then look for a motion to approve the calendar.
All
I
right.
thought, Mr. Chair?
Yes, John.
Yeah, I thought we were talking earlier about making this meeting at least 5 minutes earlier than TPB.
Uh-huh. Does anybody want to beat TPB and start before 7 a.m.? Oh, dies for a lack of second.
Oh, well.
Are there any other comments or questions about the meeting schedule proposed?
Move approval to accept.
All right. There's a motion to approve the
Edwards,
calendar as
second.
published.
Edwards, second.
And Commissioner Edwards has seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the calendar for 2022, say aye.
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 Those opposed, it's not bitterly contested. You lucked out, Mark. All right. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is election of officers for 2022. And we solicited written nominations last month, right? And through the email. And I'm going to have Mark give us an update on what we've got in terms of nominations.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we received a full slate of nominations and one for each position. I received a nomination for Hillary Seidel as chair, for Clark Gilman as vice chair, and for Joe DePinto as secretary. And so in keeping with our policy around and our bylaws around officer elections, the chair will now entertain nominations from the floor, and then council will consider action on the slate of officers.
Absolutely. So the floor is now open for nominations for 2022 officers. Let's begin with chair. Are there any other nominations for chair? I'll call 3 times. Are there any other nominations for chair? And the 3rd time, is anybody else interested in stepping up for chair? Okay, we'll close nominations for chair. We have one nomination, and that's Hillary Seidel. And now I'll move to vice chair. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? A second time. Any other nominations for vice chair? And a third opportunity. Any nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, it's myself, Clark Gilman, is nominated for vice chair. And for secretary of the Thurston Regional Planning Council, are there any nominations from the floor for secretary? Second call for nominations for secretary. Third call. Hearing none from the floor, we have a slate of 3 nominees,
Move
Hillary
approval of the
Seidel, Clark Gilman, and Joe DePinto. And I would entertain, oh, go ahead, John.
Move approval of the slate by acclamation.
Is there a second?
Yeah, Edwards will second it.
A dependable second from Commissioner Edwards. All those in favor of approving the slate by acclamation, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? No. Congratulations, Chair Seidel and Secretary Pinto. All right.
I just really quickly, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank the 3 of you for being willing to serve. These officer positions are incredibly important to the organization, to me personally as the executive director. And so I know you all are called to do a lot. And I appreciate making that effort to serve as officer. It's very important. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
And
I also want to say thank you and just let you know that we will be reaching out to all of you to get your signatures so that you will have signing authority with our agency. So expect an email from either myself or Tyson Justice, our senior accountant, later today. But thank you so much.
And we do need people to come in and give us a physical signature. So thank you for that.
great. All right. Well, congratulations. And now we're on to the next item, which is each year we appoint a subcommittee to conduct an evaluation of our executive director, Mark Daly. So I would welcome volunteers to serve with. We've had between 3 and 5 folks in recent years. And I see Hillary's hand is up. I'm assuming that's a volunteer hand. David
And-
Ayal, Gretchen.
Oh, well, great. I'll still make my plea anyway. This is a relatively low level of effort for the subcommittee. What we will do is, following this meeting, once we have the members identified, we'll reach out. We'll schedule an initial meeting with me and Berlina Lucas, where we'll go through the process and the policy of the evaluation, and then agree on a schedule. The evaluation process includes getting feedback from staff and feedback from all members. Then after we receive that feedback from staff and members, that subcommittee will meet one more time to go over that information and come up with a recommendation for council. And then council will meet in executive session at the next meeting to discuss it and agree as a full council on the evaluation.
Great. So I appreciate the 3 of you stepping up. There's room for 1 or 2 other people. If anybody else would like to be involved in conducting the evaluation, keep it open for a moment. Sounds like we're good. We have a subcommittee, and I very much appreciate your volunteering.
Thank
All right.
I'm sorry, just 1 second. Can I have 2 people, Hillary, Gretchen, and who was the third?
David Ayal. Is that
Okay.
correct, David?
Thank you.
All right. Good. Well, here's what you came for. Item 9, the Regional Federal Transportation Grant Program Call for Projects Update. And we have Vina and Paul will present this to us.
So good morning again. I am hoping that everyone can see my screen. I'm just going to look for a quick nod. That's sharing. Okay, great. So again, I'm Vina Tabbitt, and I am the Deputy Director here at TRPC. And on this agenda item is also Paul Brewster, one of our senior planners. We both work on transportation in the agency. And today we're going to talk to you about a really important part of what we do here at TRPC, and that is programming out or passing through federal funds to transportation projects to our member jurisdictions and other partners within the region. And so we call that our call for transportation projects, our federal call for transportation projects. And for those of you new to the council, we don't actually touch the federal funds. We just provide an opportunity to do project selection through the regional council and then forward that to our state partner, Washington Department of Transportation, who then enters into an agreement with the recipients of the funds, and they manage that. And the projects can range from all sorts of things, from planning to programs like school programs to physical infrastructure projects, including trails or sidewalks or roadways. Okay, so a little bit of a background. We have been talking about this for quite a while, and last April, we gave the policy board, our transportation policy board. For those of you brand new to the council, you are our governing board, but we also have a transportation policy board that is advisory on transportation issues, and we gave them a briefing in April. And then we have been working with what we call our technical advisory committee for the last year, on and off, not every 2 weeks or every month or whatnot, but steadily with the technical advisory committee. Many members of the technical advisory committee are here as staff at this meeting. Great group of folks to work with. They represent the planners and transportation engineers at your jurisdictions for the most part, as well as folks from DOT. And we also conducted a pretty intensive amount of public outreach through our transportation priority survey. If you were here last month, Katrina Van Every gave you an overview of how we did that outreach and some of our preliminary high-level results. But we really did conduct the survey with the intent of informing our call for projects update. That was the primary reason for that. We thought it would only take a few months. We were incorrect in that. And with planning, you always make adjustments as you go along. Nothing is set. And so once we did our first outreach, we realized we knew we would have to dig deeper, but we didn't realize how much time it would take. But we did paper surveys and all sorts of other ways to outreach to folks that don't traditionally participate in planning for a variety of reasons, and got extended outreach. And we're very pleased with the type of outreach we got and the way we were able to analyze that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next month. So this is just a preview. And then, so now winter and spring, we're coming back to the Transportation Policy Board and you all and letting you know, giving you a briefing on how we think the new call for projects will outline. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the pieces and then expect another 2 briefings from me at least in the coming months. And then we are hoping to get our new call for projects started in fall of 2022. The update is timely because we have a new Transportation Act that we're working under at the federal level. So there are many pieces that still have to distill down to us so that we understand them. I'll talk a little bit about that later in this presentation, but we are all just hurrying up and waiting to have information. You know, we're in a rush to figure it out, but a lot of stuff has to filter down from the federal level to the state level and then ultimately to us before we can make specific decisions. And that is very normal with the new Federal Transportation Act. Okay, so why are we even doing a call for projects update? The main reason is we wanted to have a more direct tie to our performance goals and targets. We've worked really hard as a region to develop goals and targets, and we wanted to really link how we were programming out funding to those goals and targets. We also wanted to make sure that we had a very transparent and clear competitive process. One of the reasons we wanted to do that was there is a very good chance that we are going to go from what is called a Metropolitan Planning Organization, an MPO, which is an organization that has federal responsibilities with a urbanized area, and I'm using all these specific federal terms here, but under a certain threshold, under 200,000, between 50,000 people and 200,000 people in what the census is defined as our urbanized area. But we are right on the cusp of getting over that 200,000 level. We would become a transportation management area, still a metropolitan planning organization, but with additional responsibilities. And with that comes a pretty intensive certification process, and being able to show a competitive, clear, and transparent process is an important key to that. So we want to get a little bit ahead of that. And then we also, I'm using some very specific federal terms here, we want to meet something called our obligation targets. Every year, the Department of Transportation gives us a target and says, you need to meet this amount of funding. You need to program this amount, or get projects contracted with this amount of funding, or you may lose funding. If you were on the meeting last month, I talked about how we've been meeting our targets consistently. And not only that, we've been exceeding them. And that set us up to get something called redistributed funding. And that's funding that comes from other areas that are not meeting their funding, or other states that have not been able to use their funding. So what we want to do is keep our region in this wonderful place where we've been at for quite a few years, where we are exceeding our targets and are able to then be ready to receive extra funding. And we got an extra 1.58 million from last year, which is just a really great benefit to our region that we were able to put on projects that benefit our community. Okay, so digging into a little bit of the details, we have the general concept of how we're approaching this funding program is, first of all, the projects that are eligible are the ones in these project priorities. They are planning projects, safety projects, projects that look at efficiency of our system. That could be something like a roundabout, or looking at signal priorities. Maintenance projects like pavement maintenance, or replacing transit buses or van pools or dial lift. Resiliency projects that look at creating resiliency. So if an area is subject to flooding, repeated flooding, maybe project to shore that up. And active transportation projects, projects that complete our transportation system and support all modes of travel, specifically, though, for active transportation, biking, and people who bike and walk. So those are the types of projects that we will fund. There's not really any significant differences from before. These are projects that we've funded in the past and are proud to fund. They really create a complete transportation system. How we will then award points to the projects, and this is what I'll talk a little bit more in detail about today, are something called the regional priorities. And these come from specific goals that we as a region have adopted or really feel are important in the case of efficient use of federal funding for our region, very specific to this process. And then finally, and this will come later on this spring, we will look at set-asides and funding caps so that a jurisdiction who has really great grant writers won't be able to sweep the pot, that we will be able to provide funding to many of our members, distribute it, and then set-asides, because we have a history of doing that. And also the funding that we're programming out comes in different flavors. And so we will get some funding for active transportation projects. We're hearing that we're going to get some funding for projects that reduce climate emissions. And so we're waiting a little bit to hear what the federal set-asides are, and you all may choose to do some specific set-asides. In the past, you've had rural community support set-asides to make sure that our smaller jurisdictions who are not as equipped to deal with the red tape around federal funding are still able to get projects through this funding source. Okay, so I talked about the project priorities. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip over that because I feel like I did actually talk about that. But for the regional priorities, our goals, one of the things we did on that survey I just mentioned was we asked folks for each achievement, these 4 that are listed here, indicate if it's somewhat or very important to them. And what we heard back was 98% of the folks we heard from thought that the efficient use of federal funding was somewhat or very important to them when we were programming out federal funds. The next one was integrating equity into our call for projects, 95%. We also had fairly strong support for really focusing on looking at the sustainable Thurston urban corridors and centers, concentrating, really trying to use projects to support strong and healthy urban centers and corridors, and then also strong support for reducing our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So overall, we felt like these goals had strong support. 89% is strong support no matter how you cut it. And we felt like we were on the right track here for the 4 goals that we as a region have been talking about for a long time. All right, so I want to dig into a little bit to efficient use of federal funding. For those of you that have been on the board for a while and have been through these past processes and heard from your local engineers and transportation planners, you understand that federal funding comes with an increased set of red tape. And it for construction projects in particular, it really is not cost efficient to put federal funding on small projects. The amount of red tape that you need to cut through increases the project cost to a point where it's just not desirable to put the federal funding there. It's much better to have state or local funding. And I'm sure some of you can attest to that from the smaller jurisdictions. And then some projects are a better fit for funding than others. Some fit very easily with federal funding, and others just, the programs were not set up that way, and it just hasn't been efficient. So to get an understanding of what projects and what funding levels were the best fit, we worked with our Transportation Advisory Committee. We have such expertise on this committee. Many of our members have just decades and cumulatively decades and decades of experience with federal projects, and they really know which ones they can get through easily, which ones are just they tear their hair out, and which ones sometimes they even have to give back funding because it just doesn't work. And so in general, we came up with a mix of funding levels and project types. And we proposed a matrix to award points for 2 points for the best use of federal funding, reasonable use, acceptable, and then if it was not an efficient use of federal funding. An example of not an efficient use of federal funding, and I've said this before, but we came up with anything under $250,000 that is a construction project. It's okay to have a small project if it's a planning project or working with a school district on encouraging children to walk and take active transportation to school. There's just, those are different types of projects and different requirements, but for construction, they came up with a $250,000 level. Any questions on this particular aspect of the call for projects update? Okay. So the next one was looking at our land use goals. So back quite a while now, we did a regional visioning project. It was called Sustainable Thurston, and we asked the community, how should Thurston County look, feel, and function in 2035? And we came up with a vision, and vision included our entire region. For the North County centers and corridors, the vision was for dense neighborhoods where people can live, work, and play without depending on a vehicle, where there was a variety of transportation options to get around. For the South County commuters, it was about fostering economic development and maintaining a small town feel. They're not the same as the big city. We recognize that in the North County. In neighborhoods, those areas that surround those denser urban corridors and centers, looking for a range of housing options and neighborhood and retail civic places, and then in rural lands to preserve rural character. The council adopted a goal or a target that we would locate 72% of urban housing, so it's an urban target, within a half mile of an urban center, corridor, or neighborhood center, so very specific places. And last year, when we were updating our buildable lands report, and Michael Ambrogi and Allison Osterberg were working on that, they took a look at the target and then forecast out how we were doing. And you can see we haven't been making much progress on this target at all. And then how we expected to do under our current land use plans. And so then we scratched our heads a little bit and said, well, what can we do to support this goal, to change that trajectory? And one of the things is to make transportation investments in these areas, to foster the types of communities that we want to develop. And that's one of the reasons why we want to integrate that into this call for projects. So the type of projects that support the land use goals, they could be a planning project for a neighborhood center or a corridor. The Martin Way Corridor Project is an example of that, where we brought together land use and transportation planners and looked at economic development in the corridor to see what we can do to transform the corridor into the type of corridor that better meets our planning goals. Safety projects. Safety is such a big consideration in these areas where people are out walking and biking more, much more vulnerable. And so looking at transportation safety projects, very important in there. Any intersection or street crossing, which could be safety projects, active transportation projects, anything around transit like bus stop enhancement or other infrastructure improvements, like how to get your transit vehicle through the corridor by doing a small lane that's only for transit only, called a queue jump, that might just give them a little bit of an edge. Anything on signal timing to move everyone through more efficiently, transit and vehicles and freight and all the users of these areas, and any maintenance projects. So for this category, we worked with both our long-range planners and our technical advisory committee. The long-range planners are the land use planners for our regions, and they also get together. They get together quarterly to talk about issues, and so we brought this to them. And we came up with categories that were based of project type that I just went over, and then location of the project. So again, another point system that went from 2 to -1, where projects that were in the main core areas, urban corridors and centers, would get 2 points if they were the correct project type. If they supported a little bit further out, a half mile of a corridor center or a neighborhood center, so expanding the geographic area. Or neutral if the project doesn't directly support sustainable Thurston, but it does improve access to goods and services. And then a -1 if it really took us in a different direction. And I just want to show you our map of neighborhood centers and corridors, just to show you it encompasses all the urban areas in our county. And so the core areas are the darker orange, and then the lighter is the 1-pointers, and then sort of the neighborhoods in here are the more neutral areas. So I just want to show you it's not a North County centric thing. It's it encompasses the region. Now, for those of you who are saying, what about the rural county? And I know that absolutely jumps up. We will have rural county set asides. That is, there will be a certain amount of money that will be programmed for rural county projects. That's a federal requirement. So that will therefore take care of that. They will be sort of evaluated in a different set of, or the same set of criteria, but on a separate list. Any questions on that?
I see Chris
Peter, you
Stearns
might
has
not-
his hand raised.
Thank you. I just have a question. When you were mentioning the county or rural areas, we tend to forget in Thurston County that there are some rural, or I would call them suburban areas, that are in the North County. And I think Gary Edwards is fully aware we've got a culvert problem on Green Cove Creek. And that's not in the city. It's not a half mile to one of those neighborhood centers you're talking about, although it is a half mile towards one of the nodes around the golf course there. But it is one that needs replacement, and they're working on a proposal for it right now. It might fit more under salmon recovery since it's a salmon bearing stream. Thank you.
Commissioner Edwards also has a hand up.
Yes. This maybe would be in reference to the 72% that we were shooting for some years ago, and we're not doing too good at getting there. I almost wonder if we shouldn't rethink what brought us to that 72% and look at the reality of maybe doing business in today's environment. And that environment probably is because of COVID-19, the new work from home philosophy that seems to be taking over, the ADUs that the legislature is looking at expanding ability for ADUs. I know the county expanded ability for ADUs, and the traffic flow that's going to be a little bit different from that new work from home if you have the type of job that can be looked at from that type, I guess. Anyway, I just wonder if we shouldn't make adjustments to the target rather than manipulate the process to try and achieve a target that maybe is not as attainable as it once was. So I'd be open to further discussion on that to kind of clarify things, but I just think it's worth thinking about. So I'll just stop there.
I also see Gretchen has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Edwards, for bringing that up. Actually, my question is really around the COVID implications and how many buildings we have that are empty as well. And I'm wondering if we're considering the empty buildings that we have along with the development in this plan.
So those are great questions. This particular process is not the land use visioning part of the agency. And so we have not revisited our sustainable Thurston targets. I believe the council talked about them last year and decided not to revisit them when we were just a little bit into the pandemic. That's a great policy question for you all to ponder, and Mark and I will think about that. I mean, it's great question. I think last year we were hoping the pandemic would pass quickly. And so it's always great to keep thinking about our community. And that's wonderful to hear your feedback on that. Okay.
We've got John O'Callahan has a hand up. You're muted, my friend.
Thank you. One of the things I think that we need to start really paying more attention to is the electrification of our vehicles. There's a lot of the major manufacturers that by 2025, which is just 3 years away, that are going to go strictly to building electric cars. By 2030, the president's already said that he wants to have as much electrification of our transportation system as possible. And we're not really taking a look at that. For example, a project is unlikely to increase or decrease greenhouse emissions. Well, I'm not sure how we're going to be looking at that, considering that it's a forced issue at this point. So it's something that we need to start looking at as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to take just a moment as chair to suggest that these are really important and overarching conversations about the direction of land use and our goals. This particular presentation, I think staff are hoping to get input about what we think about updating the process for the grant program calls to reflect performance criteria primarily, which is something we've been trying to incorporate over the last couple of years. And to make us as competitive as possible when there are the redistribution of funds. So I think that, Vina, is that what you're trying to get feedback on at this particular time?
All of this feedback is really wonderful. Thank you, Chair. But yes, any concerns you have at this point, we're really shaping it, and we're coming too early in the process, not coming with a polished product. So we'll take all of this into advisement as we move forward. And so the third and the last one I'm going to talk to you about today is the regional priority to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets. We set greenhouse gas reduction targets through the Sustainable Thurston process, and then recently, or in the last couple of years, updated them. They are currently 85% below 215 levels by 2050. And so we were looking to look at what type of projects might support these goals. We did a lot of research, and we had the criteria reviewed by our climate partners as well as the technical advisory committee. And again, we bucketed our projects into 4 groups, some with 2 points, 1 point, 0 points, or -1 points, with the most points being given to projects where greenhouse gas reduction is a primary purpose of the projects. So electric vehicle charging stations would be an example of that sort of project. Or ones that are likely to increase greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, a major road widening project on the interstate potentially could increase our vehicle miles traveled. Now, we're not likely to fund any of those because those major projects are simply out of our funding level anyway. So, but I just wanted to point out there's a range of projects. And if you look at the accompanying material I sent in the staff report, you can see where the specific projects lay out. Like we said, we want to have a very clear and transparent project process so that when folks filled out an application form, they could see the points their project would get before they even submitted it. All right, next month, I will come and talk to you about our equity criteria. We're working our way through. We've talked to our TAC about that. It's going to the policy board on next Wednesday, and then it'll come to you next month. And then the last piece will be looking at the set-asides and funding caps. And like I mentioned, we will have rural and urban splits. In fact, they're going to have 4 different categories. So it might be a little tricky, but we'll figure that out. We'll talk about set-asides. And that's something you might want to think about now to get ready for that discussion. But do we want to focus on pavement maintenance for one of our planning cycles? Or do we want to focus on completing projects that have already received federal funding that just need a little boost to get finished? Certainly, do we want to continue supporting our rural community support program, the program that funds the tribes and our smaller counties in the rural area, or the smaller cities and towns? And then again, what is an appropriate funding cap so not one jurisdiction can, quote unquote, sweep the pot? So the next steps are, like I said, look at the equity goal, the funding set-asides, then we would go for public comment, come back to you for approval, and then do the call for projects next fall. So we've talked a little bit about the criteria. I really appreciate the feedback. Is there anything else that you want to let us know before we move forward? And like I said, you'll have plenty of time in the coming months to keep giving us your feedback on this.
Dina, I'd like to ask, is this process update you're doing related to, we spent a lot of time in the Transportation Policy Board trying to find a path that both made a competitive process, but respected the values that this board has had about sharing and collaborating and having that urban-rural split. Is that part of what you're trying to shape in this process update?
Yes, thank you. Yes, there's been many years of discussions about how we want to approach this. So keeping the values we have as a region to really make it easy for the funding to flow through, reducing the red tape on our part, making sure we're giving a good distribution to all our partners, having that collaborative, really great process that we've had in the past, keeping all the great things from our past process, but trying to make a better direct link to our performance goals and our regional goals and targets.
Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, we've had a lot of this discussion with the Technical Advisory Committee. We don't necessarily expect this updated process to result in very different outcomes in terms of the kinds of projects that are funded. We believe we've been doing an excellent job of funding priority projects that you all have been making decisions that support our goals. This is just helping us make that more explicit.
I appreciate that. Is there any other feedback for staff? This is not an action item, but just one where staff was seeking feedback. Any other feedback on this transportation grant program call for projects process? Okay, we've got a decision. Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more time. When you're looking at transportation, especially now, it seems like we're actually moving on a higher level than where we are, looking at about 10, 15, 20 years down the road. As and that's going to change the kind of vehicles that we have now. For example, Andy Ryder, he's got a Tesla that's self-driving, and they're going through the beta stages right now. So to get all the bugs out, it's not going to be too much longer before these type of vehicles start coming out on a more affordable mass production basis. They're, like I said, they're going through testing right now. I think we need to start maybe put together a committee either late this year or next year and really start getting into what's coming, because at least I can see it. Clark, I've shown you what I've seen before, but we need to start looking at transportation differently than what we are right now, because the federal government is looking at it as status quo and doesn't change. I think if we start looking at the realities instead of status quo, we'll be ahead of the game and in a better position to jockey for funds later on in the future.
Thank you. And that is a great opportunity for me to talk about one of the items that we are planning to work on. And I'll be coming to you with our transportation planning work program, I think in 2 months, and highlight some of this. But we are working on scoping out to develop a plan to prepare for electric vehicles and connected and autonomous vehicles. So we are actively thinking about that and have a plan to move forward on that issue. So.
Thank you.
And plus you will have an opportunity to tell us what else you think we should be working on to get ahead of things. So thank you.
And incoming Chair Seidel has her hand up.
Thank you. Since we have we're running a little ahead, I wanted to ask a really quick question, surprise, about equity. So I really appreciate that you all are thinking really intentionally going to bring something specific about that at a later date, because I think we'll probably want to dig into that. I'm curious to know what the process behind determining the process is. So besides the Technical Advisory Committee and the Transportation Policy Board, what other strategies, tools, communities, resources are you using to build that decision-making tool?
Yes, that one we dug into much deeper for all the reasons that you very much understand. We looked at a lot of research with other organizations like us were doing, specifically how to integrate equity into the call for projects. And we also really leaned heavily on what we heard from our community through that transportation priority survey. So we'll bring back our thoughts to you, but we do expect a very robust discussion because we know you all have been thinking about this and how it affects your jurisdictions. And so that's why we are doing that as a separate agenda item, because we know it's going to be more in-depth discussion.
Carolyn.
Hi, I would just like to add my voice to trying to be in alignment with the Climate Mitigation Steering Committee's work and really placing strong emphasis on carbon reduction. We know that transportation is one of the largest contributors to carbon in our atmosphere. And we don't have much time left to do something about it. So I really hope we'll take this much more seriously in the future and do all we can to help us reach our targets. And I also want to recognize the great work that TRPC is doing to helping that climate mitigation plan actually move forward. So thank you, Mark and Allison and staff.
Well, thank you very much, Vina. We need to do a quick poll. We're running ahead of time on the agenda, and our next item is a 30-minute item on regional trails. Would you like to take a 5-minute break now or after that section? How about raise your hand if you think we should take a 5-minute break now? It looks like we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll be back for a 30-minute presentation. It's 9:19. I'll see you at 9:24. All right. Well, Mayor DePinto, I'm glad to meet you virtually anyhow today. I hope to meet you in person soon.
Thank you, likewise.
Yeah, yeah. All right. And I'm going to stretch my legs too. It's 5 minutes. All right, we'll just give it another minute, Paul. We'll get the screen populated and then we'll give you the reins. Okay, welcome back. We have Paul Brewster and Katrina Van Every presenting on the Southwest Thurston County Trail Feasibility Study and the Thurston Regional Trails Plan. And it looks like Paul has his show up, ready to go.
Thank you, Clark, and good morning, council members. I'm Paul Brewster, Senior Planner at TRPC. And I just want to say in many ways how grateful I am that working at TRPC, I get to work on planning trails for the Thurston County region. And to kind of just share and highlight some of my enthusiasm in the role of the regional council, I just kind of want to do a brief retrospective before I jump into my presentation as it's related. Trails, regional trails, and I'm talking about like shared paved multi-use paths, the kind like the Chehalis Western Trail. They really kind of cross an intersection between transportation, recreation and health, open space, economic development for drawing and attracting visitors to our South County communities to spend dollars as they're visiting and bicycle touring that part of our community. Also really in providing equity in providing transportation routes and access to people who can't drive or choose not to drive, who choose to take a more active approach to how they get around their community, as well as being a critical part of the climate mitigation plan, and that shared use trails and their operation are really a carbon neutral form of transportation. So with that, I just want to highlight that our region has been involved with planning for trails and bicycle transportation for nearly 50 years. And I just want to acknowledge Thurston County was among the first, and it was the Thurston County Parks Department in 1976 that did a countywide bicycle plan. And I just think it's interesting to point out that it was a Parks Department doing bicycle transportation planning before it was a Public Works Department. In 1987, then TRPC did a metropolitan area bicycle plan for the Thurston County region that largely focused in on Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater area. And then in 1993, the cities of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater contracted with TRPC to do an urban trails plan. And that urban trails plan is really sort of the core, the foundation that led to regional trails planning here in Thurston County. And it wasn't that 1987 bicycle metropolitan plan I showed you a minute ago was the first to show a shared use path here in our communities. And it is the Evergreen Parkway path on the north side leading out to Evergreen, the one that's actually closed now because the pavement is in such a disarray. And then lastly is the 2007 Regional Trails Plan that was really the first countywide master plan. And so this presentation to you, I think today aligns with your mission in that you're providing visionary leadership on developing and promoting the implementation of this regional trail network. And also your role as an MPOR, TPO, and how you program federal funds to priority transportation projects. You really need this guiding document to inform and prioritize investments that you make in our active transportation network. So with that, I'm gonna today kind of give you an overview of the Southwest Thurston County Trail Feasibility Study, and then kind of segue into the Regional Trails Plan, where I'm kind of using the trail study as an illustrative example of the planning process, a more detailed planning process for trails, whereas the Regional Trails Plan is really a higher level view and inventory, kind of like our Regional Transportation Plan. And so in 2018, TRPC awarded Thurston County $150,000 in a surface transportation block grant to perform a Rochester Grand Mountain Trail feasibility study. We obligated this funding early last spring, and the project kicked off in the summer of 2021. With the county being the sponsor, it's represented by Public Works, Public Health and Social Services, and their community planning and economic development departments. And TRPC is leading the process. We're doing the community engagement. Katrina Van Every and I are the project co-leads. And we're working with SCJ Alliance as the lead technical consultant, and they're bringing their planning and engineering expertise to this study.
Oh, oh, there we go. All right. Just going to make sure we had slides.
We've got slides. So the idea for a trail in Southwest Thurston County was introduced in the 2007 Regional Trails Plan. It was proposed by Rochester community members stemming from their desire to create a safer walking and biking route for students to travel to school, really a need to get students off the shoulder of US Highway 12. And there was also a need to connect the Chehalis Reservation, Rochester, and Grand Mountain communities to the future Gate Belmore Trail. So the Regional Trails Plan proposed this Gate Rochester Grand Mountain Trail really running along parallel of the Puget Sound and Pacific Railroad. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but in the 2007 plan, the Puget Sound and Pacific Railroad Roadmaster was a stakeholder to this planning process. And recently, Katrina, SCJ, and I met with the lead railroad engineer for Puget Sound Pacific Railroad, and they're continuing to express to be a good partner in this study effort. So there's really been no action on this trail concept until the Main Street Rochester Strategy Project was launched around 2018. This project brought renewed interest to make Rochester a more bicycle and pedestrian friendly area. And next to frontage improvements, support for a shared use trail was the highest priority action identified in a 2018 community survey part of that project. And so some of the themes that we're seeing in some of our public comments now that are really echoing what came out of that study is community members really want to see some type of trail hub at the Rochester Community Center to connect to this Grand Mountain Rochester Trail as well as the Gate Belmore Trail. So existing trails in the Thurston County region support a variety of activities, including walking, running, cycling, skating, equestrian use, wildlife viewing, photography, or just unwinding from stress. And it goes without saying the Grand Mountain, Rochester, and Chehalis Reservation communities would benefit from a trail that would connect their communities. Because looking at this map, there really is no existing pathways for Southwest County residents to bike or hike into part of the regional trail network. That's the area shown in green, the existing alignments. So there's about 58 miles of existing publicly managed multi-use trails, with the three major paved trails are the 22-mile Chehalis Western Trail. In fact, the Chehalis Western is listed in the top 10 trails in Washington State by the National Rails to Trails Conservancy. Second is the 14-mile Yelm Rainier Tenino Trail. Both of these are managed by Thurston County. And the third major trail is the Karen Fraser Woodland Trail, individually owned and managed separately by Lacey and Olympia. And Tumwater's Deschutes Valley Trail is the newest addition to the network, stretching from Brewery Park to Tumwater Historic Park. And in fact, that trail recently was given an honorary name of the Pete Comet Trail. The feasibility studies completed include the Olympia Karen Fraser Woodland Trail Phase 3 and 4, the Yelm Rainier Tenino Extension Feasibility Study, which looked at extending the trail from Tenino to Bucota and out to Tenino West City limits, the Gate Belmore Trail Connectivity Study, the West Bay Park Recreation Trail and Restoration Analysis, the Tumwater Deschutes Valley Trail Study and Design, and currently underway is a Yelm Prairie Line Trail extension to Roy. And just about all of these trail corridors and some of these studies really owe a portion of their existence to TRPC's federal transportation grant programs. So here's just an overview of the study area. You can note at the northwest section that top left of the slide shows the southern terminus of the Gate Belmore Trail corridor entering in the planning area. And just to the southwest is an existing multi-use path along Anderson Road that serves the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. And to the east, you can see a proposed trail corridor that was identified in the Grand Mountain Transportation Study. So our trail study will account for these opportunities to connect to them. So I kind of want to give you an overview a trails planning process. And this slide kind of presents a framework. And in the blue box is really the area that we're focusing on, with the area in yellow being future phases. So the Thurston Regional Trails Plan, adopted by TRPC, really serves as the first countywide master trails plan. And the master plan really takes ideas and starts to develop a conceptual trail or trail system. It provides that high level vision, expresses community values, and kind of provides general direction and guidance for future actions. And this Southwest County Trail Feasibility Study now takes a detailed and systematic look at trail opportunities within the study area. And in some ways, this study combines both master plan and feasibility concept phases of trail planning. So this study is engaging communities to identify opportunities for routes and trail related facilities like trailheads, seating, and a variety of uses. It'll evaluate the types of activities people want to pursue and evaluate the needs for active transportation in this part of the community. The feasibility and concept stages is investigative phase to define project objectives and potential outcomes. And over the course of the study, we'll ask the public and stakeholders to consider multiple trail route scenarios within the planning area. We'll consider right-of-way and determine if property acquisition may be necessary. We'll look at constraints posed by the built environment, as well as other constraints such as creeks, floodplains, utilities, and property ownership. Community feedback will kind of lay the groundwork for the criteria to be used to measure how effective the proposed routes coming out of the study will perform to meet the community's needs. As an example, parents may want trails that connect to schools and parks so children have safe routes to walk or bike. And in this case, a proposed trail's directness of route, its visibility from a security standpoint, and its separation from automobile traffic would be useful criteria for evaluating such trails' safety characteristics and usefulness for younger trail users. We anticipate that one or more routes may emerge as preferred options by the end of the study, and the results of this will inform Thurston County's future trail planning activities, as well as updates to the regional trails plan and our regional transportation plan. In this feasibility study, if a trail proves feasible, will inform future efforts for a design phase. So during that design phase, engineers and planners perform a more detailed assessment and prepare construction documentation to bring a project closer to shovel-ready state. And this involves land surveys, stormwater analysis and design, geotechnical studies, traffic analysis, cultural resource analysis, and wildlife assessments. And this design phase must satisfy all the local, state, and federal permitting requirements for a project. So we're really not considering any of that with this study, but we're laying the groundwork to support those future phases. And so prior to construction, the county may need to secure right-of-way for a trail, which can involve private property acquisition, obtaining easements within utilities, and of course, perhaps negotiating for right-of-way within Puget Sound and Pacific Railroad if that is the preferred option. So then a variety of construction documents such as drainage and erosion control design, demolition, grading, plan and profile specifications, signing detour routes, landscaping plans, cost estimates, all of that must be completed before a project can go out to bid for construction. So with all of this, it can really make us all appreciate that the entire process from idea to construction can sometimes take several years and in some instances, decades. So what we're hoping to achieve with this study is really just get feedback from the community to learn what's important to them. Like if we are proposing a trail, would they use it? Where would they want it to connect to? How frequently would they use it? How would it meet their community's needs, their household's needs? We want to identify and evaluate those potential routes. Of course, we're going to need trailheads because this is a particularly rural area, so people will need to travel to a trailhead to access the trail in some instances. We want to estimate costs for not just the trails themselves, but what it takes that trail to be a system with related infrastructure such as seating, wayfinding signage, as well as the longer term maintenance costs. and then really wrap this all up in a report to be able to articulate what the preferred strategy is and implementation strategies for when and how these projects could be funded and constructed. So the project team, we're focusing our initial public outreach on communities within the planning areas. Both the Main Street, Rochester, and Grand Mound transportation studies were performed pre-COVID, and during those studies, it really taught TRPC and Thurston County staff that Southwest Thurston County residents really show up to public meetings in their communities if given the opportunity. We don't have that option right now. So earlier on in the summer, we were kind of hopeful that vaccination efforts would have lowered our COVID transmission rates. But by August, with the surge and the Delta variant, we quickly realized that that just wasn't going to be practical. So we shifted our emphasis to doing a virtual online open house. And so we mailed 6,700 postcard invitations to households within the study area, while simultaneously conducting a social media campaign to increase awareness about the study. We installed large banners in locations throughout the community, and we sent email invitations to distribution lists created from previous studies. Our first meeting, we kicked off on November 4th. We only had 56 community members show up, but it was nice to have breakout group discussions and get their feedback. And staff, we really think that that was a productive meeting, and the participants really represented their interests well. And then we also invited the community to participate in this online open house that ran late October through the end of December. And this open house consisted of 3 tabs. The first being an introduction to the project and its objectives. The second tab was an interactive map with tools to allow participants to draw routes, insert points, post comments associated with their mapped features. And the third tab was a 12-question survey that sought information on how and why people would use trails, desired route characteristics, community destinations, and what other trail-related facilities should be considered as part of the study. And we also included 7 demographic questions to get a sense of who is represented in the survey and the responses. We expect to complete a summary of both the community survey results and the interactive map contents and publish the results before the end of the month. And so what will be included in the overall deliverables, we'll have a current conditions report that summarizes existing plans, any technical information that would inform opportunities for trails, knowing where the constraints are within the study area. We'll have a route needs assessment. That's a summary of trail alignment scenarios and community-based performance criteria to evaluate how trails satisfy community needs. The results of this route performance ranking and cost estimates for construction and maintenance will be presented to the community, as well as a implementation strategy that highlights the preferred development scenario, funding sources, potential timeline and phases, and a final document that pulls this all together. So I'd really now like to lead you into the update to the trails plan. So as I mentioned earlier, it was adopted in 2007, and this is a regional blueprint to guide the development of a multi-use trail system to serve a variety of active transportation and recreation uses. The plan identifies 29 segments totaling 145 miles, 87 of which remains undeveloped. And this plan most directly supports the Regional Transportation Plans Policy 11C, which is invest in a regional network of contiguous and connected north-south and east-west dedicated shared use trail corridors to serve as the backbone of the non-motorized system. And so this trails plan provides a vision for a regional trail network. So I think that's the real part of the regional trails plan, is it's not just this collection of segments. It's trying to define how these segments come together to form and operate and function as a network to serve our community. Communities have accomplished multiple recommendations that were presented in the Trails Plan as shown on this slide. There's also other accomplishments that are that were completed that were not included in the plan, but certainly is consistent with and fulfills the goals and policies. In addition, several of these success stories are attributed to TRPC's involvement. Excuse me, most notably is TRPC's contribution to the Bridging the Gap of the Chehalis Western Trail project. So 7 years after TRPC adopted the Trails Plan, the final bridge to close the gap over the Pacific Avenue was completed. Both the Transportation Policy Board and the Regional Council were instrumental in championing this multi-agency approach to completing this project. And so looking forward, perhaps this regional trails plan is going to inform TRPC's next major trail investment. So the update to the trails plan will include a policy framework to clarify the relationship of the trails plan to local plans and the regional transportation plan. The framework will review consistency between local policies and the regional trails plan for the development of trails and a trail network, as well as really recognizing that trails are part of our multimodal transportation system. The planning process will confirm the vision and assess the effectiveness of the existing plan and its goals and policies. We'll provide that region-wide context for regional trail network that illustrates the alignment of trails and the populations they serve. The plan will be rich with maps to show readers how the trails will connect. And the plan will also include information to assess how trails serve segments of our communities based on people's age, income, disability, and ethnicity. A system assessment will summarize accomplishments over the last 15 years, highlighting the success stories and partnerships I just described. It will present the existing network, its utilization where known, and describe the operational and maintenance conditions as presented through information provided by our plan partners, the trail managers, where that information is available. And this assessment will inform follow-up planning recommendations to guide the region and trail managers for interagency coordination for trail development, operations, and maintenance. I really think the primary purpose of this plan too is to provide policymakers and the public a 10-year list of trail segments and projects that are anticipated to proceed to a design, right-of-way, or construction phase based on the project's ability to satisfy any necessary feasibility or technical studies, anticipate or any anticipated or secure funding status, and the sponsoring agency's anticipated project programming and readiness to proceed. This section will include details such as alignments, who are the leads, what are the phases, cost estimates, timelines of potential funding sources, and we anticipate that this information will be presented in an easy to use map and narrative format. And then we'll have that longer list of projects because we don't want to lose sight of projects, for example, like a railroad right-of-way that still has freight and rail moving on it, but should the future opportunity present itself to acquire that right-of-way, we want to make sure it's documented so that the region is positioned to act on it when the time comes. We'll have recommendations for follow-up planning activities because we're not going to be able to solve all of our issues over the course of this planning study. And there's a need to bring partners together to continue collaborating. So these recommendations will guide potential interagency coordination for maintenance, operations, things like public information, how people can navigate the system, make sure that the trail is safe and secure, provide opportunities for community stewardship, address parking demand, and really perhaps come up with a strategy for longer term data collection. And last but not least, we really need a plan maintenance and update process. It's been 14 years since the regional trails plan was adopted by TRPC. And this should be more than a plan that sits on a shelf. It should be a plan that's guiding actions in the communities. So we have an advisory work group that's providing subject matter expertise, that's advising the planning process. They're weighing in on the policy framework. They're evaluating the state of the system to help shape recommendations for those follow-up planning activities. The advisory work group will evaluate the 10-year and longer-term project lists. They will help inform public engagement activities to inform the plan's recommendations, as well as shape that plan maintenance and update process. And so this here is just a slide to show who's involved with, who's represented on the advisory work group. We'll invite additional stakeholders in during the course of the project, but we have state and local transportation and park staff who are really responsible for more of the planning and administrative side. We have trail managers who are involved in sort of the operations and the response side of things. We want to make sure that public health and community wellness is included. We have adult and youth transportation demand management represented, and we have community members who are active trail users and are proponents of active transportation, as well as people who are experienced working with people who experience barriers to transportation. So just a quick timeline. In May, we hope to bring back to the policy board and the council that draft 10-year list of projects. In July, we'll give the TPB a preview of the plan's goals and policies and draft recommendations for follow-up activities. And in October, we'll be presenting to the TPB the draft plan, public comments, and consider a recommendation to the council. Overall, on the project, we have 6 advisory work group meetings. The first was in January. The advisory work group is anticipated to wrap up its contributions by September. In June will really be sort of the more intensive public outreach process with an online open house with survey of the project lists and recommendations, as well as doing some on the trail boothing on the weekends to reach out to people who are on the trail, make them aware of the recommendations and guide them as to how they can provide feedback. Staff will be doing plan development July through August, with September doing public comments on the draft plan. By October, we're really starting the process through the TPB and the council to be reviewing the plan, form recommendations for adoption, and by the end of the year, asking TRPC to consider adoption of the plan. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions whatever time we have available.
Go ahead, Robin.
Hi, Mr. Brewster. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about whether and to what extent we consider lighting on the trails as we're developing these projects. Because, like, I'm a trail user. I sometimes ride my bike from Lacey to Olympia to go to work, which is awesome, except for the half of the year when on my return ride, it's dark, right? And so I have a light on my bike, but it would be nice if there were lights on trails. And I know that we have to think about light pollution for residents that live near the trail systems. And I'm guessing that adding lighting increases the cost of a project. But I wonder if there's ESCO grant funding that's available and if that's a part of the analysis when you develop the projects.
Yeah, that's a great question. Lighting is certainly can help people feel safer and more confident in the trail in dark. You've sort of hit it. It's a matter of cost. A lot of these areas of the trail actually don't have an electrical supply over the course of the trail. So installing electrical conduit along the course of the trail is perhaps the most significant cost. One of the strategies could be areas where there's intersections or street crossings, that maybe that would be the priority for where some lighting can go in. And I think the last option is really public education to make sure that trail users supply their own lights when they're on the trail, and also doing some campaigns where communities actually through grants and other programs could distribute lighting to community members in need.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Paul, great presentation. Thank you very much,
Hello.
as always. Just a quick just a quick couple of comments more than anything else. One is regarding accessibility. I would encourage you to reach out to also some of the groups that are strong advocacy groups in Thurston County for those that have limited mobility. Groups like Morningside would be very interested in mobility and access to those points. I think the other thing that you might want to think about is you started the presentation out with a, unfortunately, a lot of times I see things through the economic development lens with a notion that this is an economic development tool and it attracts tourists, et cetera. But I would also encourage you to reach out to the local destination marketing organization, the Experience Olympia and Beyond, the Visitor Convention Bureau, as how they can help you promote this. And they may have some opportunities for funding, as well as some ways that they can help build out that system. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Michael.
Go ahead, Hillary.
Thanks. Thanks for such a great presentation, Paul. I really love how you always bring such a rich understanding of the history of this work to our conversations. And I, as someone who's still relatively new to TRPC and elected leadership, I really appreciate hearing those details. It helps inform our decisions and think about the decisions that were made before and why and where we are now. So thank you for that. The one thing that I think this is kind of dovetailing into what Michael just said, is that I really appreciated, I think kind of at the early end of the presentation, how you spoke about using an example of families and children and sort of what their concerns are and attending to those concerns. And that sort of like dips our toe into the concept of universal design. And so my encouragement around that is to like jump all the way into the pool in a sense. And I think if we plan projects ahead of time, thinking through the lens and inquiring from the communities who express reticence to use the trails, then we end up with projects that we don't have to mitigate with lighting later on, as Robin was mentioning, because we've thought in advance about what are the qualities and features of these spaces that are going to make them feel safer and more accessible, not only to families, but also to, as Michael mentioned, individuals with disabilities, but also folks who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, who we know year over year report lower trail usage. And at least from folks who I've spoken to in my community, I think there is a sense, especially from our BIPOC community members, of sort of limited safety in some of those spaces. And so anything we can do to more deeply engage, I think, with our communities who are not using our trail system, which is this like beautiful tool for equitable access to healthy living and the outdoors. Anything we can do to just jam pack their perspective to the front end planning would be really beneficial, I think, overall, and it would benefit everybody. So if we want to talk more offline about maybe some community groups and stuff like that, and we can try and connect folks to some of our student groups, student leader groups for students of color. I'm sure Gretchen and Mel would have student groups as well that you guys could work with. I think that would just lead to an overall really positive project that really put equity at the front end rather than having to be in a position of mitigating it at the back end.
Thanks for the suggestion, Hillary.
And we've got Carolyn followed by Chris.
Well, and to tag into what Robin and Hillary were saying, wondering if we couldn't reach out to Community Solar and other groups to look at ways that we might actually get lighting on the trail without having to run utility lines out there. I mean, we already power school speed limit signs and blinking that way. Why couldn't we? And we have solar light powered lights in our yards. So I think we ought to think safety and think creatively about how we can make those things happen. When you think about, if you, particularly this Southwest Trail here, if you want school kids using it, you think about the percentage of the year when they would be walking to school in the dark. it only makes sense to light the trail as much as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn.
I just wanted to comment as a comparison, and Paul, I liked your presentation also about the history. It is true that our trail system has been an innovator, but there are some trail systems in our state that have grown faster. I can think of Skagit County's trail system, which is a major tourist item for the county. There are people that come up to bicycle it from Seattle and other places. And it has also dovetailed well with the retail community there. They have a lot of flat lands in the Delta area. So, you know, it's fairly easy biking for a lot of places, but also quite an extensive trail system that they've used of the county farm roads and whatnot. So, you know, people have taken our good ideas and ran with them. I think we could look at some of the successes they've had in integrating it with their economy that might be beneficial to us as a, you know, an area outside of Seattle. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
And I'm going to go ahead and piggyback all these great suggestions. When you were talking about gathering trail input on the weekends, it made me think about practical cyclists commuting, as I believe Hillary or Robin mentioned about cycling on the trail. And I wonder about piggybacking with Bike to Work Day when there's already water stations and information stations set up. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
And there's,
I'll just add, Clark, I think that's a wonderful idea. And unfortunately now with COVID, there's a lot fewer people riding their bikes to work. However, however, this highlights the need for collecting data and gathering that information in a long-term fashion so that it's not just done every, 5 years as part of a trails plan update. It should be part of an ongoing systematic effort to understand how people are using our trails.
well, thank you so much for the presentation, and we'll look forward to updates over the next few months as this process and group get going. All right. Now, we've got the legislative update next, but before I turn it to Karen, I just want to recognize we just heard from Michael Cade and Chris Stearns, two people who didn't get a chance to get introduced, and we also have Tumwater Council person Eileen Swartout, who's joined us just because we're kind of a partly new group in 22. So I wanted to recognize those folks who didn't get acknowledged during the introductions. Karen, tell us about the excitement in the legislature the day after cutoff.
Yes, exactly. One of my favorite days. So my name is Karen Parkhurst. I am the Planning and Policy Director here at TRPC, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening at the legislature. We're at a point that doing a PowerPoint is very difficult because it would be a lie within seconds of finishing the PowerPoint because things are moving very quickly. And so I just wanted to remind you that we're on day 26 of the 60-day session, which is scheduled to end on March 10th. As Clark mentioned, yesterday was the first cutoff, and that was to have bills from non-fiscal committees pass out of committee and be read in on the floor. And then Monday is the fiscal cutoff. So madly working in committee. And it's important also to remember, I always have to remind myself as I'm madly crossing bills off of my tracking list, that sometimes these bills magically appear again. They didn't make it through the first cutoff, the second cutoff, or the third cutoff, but there they are, reintroduced as another bill or as an amendment to a bill. So I think some things do hang on. I just wanted to let you know that in addition to the bills that were left over from last session, the House and Senate introduced nearly 1,200 bills for this small, short session. So it's been interesting. I also wanted to mention that our priorities this session, thanks to you and the work of the policy board, we have a very narrow focus. So we're looking at two issues. One is I-5 and the issues around I-5, especially in the Delta area. And this is some of the information that the Nisqually tribe has provided as far as some environmental issues, as well as known issues about the, previously known issues about I-5 and congestion. Transit will never work as well as it could on I-5 until we have HOV lanes, so that you have some more benefit to riding transit. We also, when we talk about this I-5 piece, say, but we also have to think about a multimodal system, and the fact that if our local roads don't work, then it doesn't support the whole network, and that we need to look at maintenance. Our second issue is broadband. We have all learned the importance of broadband. And so we are asking for funding, but we're also asking for cooperation and collaboration to be part of that funding. We know that from different funding sources, there are funds available to the PUD, there are funds available to the tribe, there are funds available to small cities and larger cities, and we think it's really critical to really leverage those funds to have people working together at the local level to say, oh, if we tagged on over here in this corner, we may get some things done. So those are our two issues. We have met with the majority of our members. We're still scheduling meetings, and sometimes it's with staff instead of members, but we definitely try and get our issues in front of them. And so I'm going to ask Clark here, I'm going to put him on the spot and basically say, you've been at these meetings. Any comments you want to make before I get into some issues?
I think you probably know, but across our region, our delegation sort of is diverse in politics, but was really shared our interest in I-5 and in the Yelm bypass, or roundabouts, as we were calling it more softly. But those were really broadly shared, and I think everybody heard our conversation about how much we prioritize broadband, but how we feel like it would benefit from uniting the various opportunities and efforts from different entities to coordinate more. So I appreciate that a lot, and we were received well enough to have folks reaching out to ask us to schedule follow-ups in a couple of weeks and keep talking to them as the possibility of a transportation package matures.
Mm-hmm. And in addition,
one thing I would add just briefly, Karen, is and Karen and I kind of divide and conquer a little bit on our meetings with legislators. So many of our members are also part of the Thurston Shared Legislative Partnership. And so as that group, I've been attending the meetings that are scheduled through that group, through the chamber and Doug Ma. And we've gotten really good feedback how hearing a consistent message on these priorities between the Thurston Shared Legislative Partnership, TRPC, South Sound Military and Communities Partnership, how them hearing these same things over and over again is really strengthening their ability to advocate for some of the issues that we bring forward.
Okay. In addition to Chair Gilman, we also, our legislative meetings include the chair of our Transportation Policy Board, Andy Ryder, and one of the business representatives to our policy board, which is Renee Radcliffe Sinclair, who is the executive director of TVW and a former legislator. And so we have great conversations with our members. So I want to talk about broadband just a little bit. There are probably about 5 or 6 bills that are still alive that deal with broadband, and we have sponsorship from some of our representatives, Barno and Representative Dolan, on some of these bills. So it really is the Public Works Board looking at what their role is in this and how they've been working with the issue and really doing kind of an after action. And some of the things that they recommend are we need to work better with the communities. definitely a focus on low income, reduced rates for low income people, just figuring out how we continue to serve the community and the ways that the library and school districts and transit and others have been supporting the communities as we move through COVID. And then there's some modifications to some pieces. So we're redefining what broadband means, because in order to take advantage of federal funds, we need to have a broader definition. So there's a lot of pieces, and I think there's funding for it. I'm going to just step away for 1 second and talk about a bill that I'm excited about. I'm not going to talk about our state nickname, the state dinosaur, or the state sport, but I do want to mention that several of our members, representatives of Barno, Dolan, and Bateman, have sponsored legislation to bring the Imagination Library, the Dolly Parton Project, to our state as well. So that's moving forward, because I love books and think all kids should have books. So that was my Karen aside. So some of the legislation we're watching, Representative Barkas and other members of his caucus, and he is our main minority person on transportation in the House, is basically saying our transportation system has no money. Our general fund has more money. Is there a way that we can borrow across these funds, and what would that look like? There's a pretty strong agreement that no one wants to raise taxes. So how do we take advantage of this opportunity? Some of the conversation is about, is this a one-time thing, or are we always going to be doing this? So there are concerns, but there's definitely support for looking at how we fund transportation. We have versions of the capital transportation and operating budgets from the House, the Senate, and the governor. And so we really haven't started looking at budgets much except in the background, but that will be coming up. One of the things we keep hearing about is a larger transportation package, one of those multi-year packages. And depending on who you talk to and what day it is, there's confidence that we'll have one. Of course, we won't have one. And it will be small or it will be huge, or we're going to wait till the feds do what they're going to do with funding. So we're watching that, but I don't think that anyone has a secret answer to that. They're working on it too. If you remember, we had the trucking industry association come and talk to us last year about some of the issues with freight and trucking. And we are seeing a number of bills that deal with especially truck parking, access to restrooms, access to rest areas. And so that's something that I think has some definite legs this session. I don't know what the final piece will look like, but I don't know if you have noticed, but often you have truckers who are parked on the shoulder of on and off ramps because they have no other place to park. And so that's one we're keeping an eye on. Autonomous vehicles, probably half a dozen or more bills are still alive dealing with autonomous vehicles. And this is primarily focused on testing and what are the rules around testing and how do we manage safety with the testing. More vehicles, school buses, obviously there's some interest in the formula of how we fund school buses and what that means with having the COVID restrictions on kids being in the schools. There's also funding out there talking about electrification of our school bus fleet. Then I guess I would mention that every year we have changes to the Growth Management Act. That's something that we certainly pay attention to as we look at both land use and transportation. There are bills that deal with the Growth Management Act and salmon and climate and infill and vesting, shoreline, sewer, water, and intense rural development. Part of the pressure on the Growth Management Act really deals a lot with that urban-rural split. How do we support growth in our communities, but avoid sprawl and the cost of sprawl? And so I think there's a lot of conversation about how we can do this. The vesting bill is very controversial. That is basically, well, wait a minute, I had these things permitted 7 years ago, and I want you to keep them even though the rules have changed. And so lots of conversations with the business community. The emergency services is another one. There have been numerous bills over the last few years in dealing with improving 911 service. We all know that we have seen some failures of 911 in recent history, and so it really needs to be worked on. We're also looking at how communities can deal with extreme weather conditions, preparing for drought, communications in addition to 911 during emergencies, and making sure that we are supporting the more diverse community in dealing with emergencies. So do we know where people who have disabilities are as we're looking at having to evacuate an area? And then little things like requiring air conditioning in adult family homes. Until last summer, that was not a conversation, but with that burst of heat, that has become a problem, obviously. And then finally, I would mention climate, again, reducing greenhouse gas, a number of bills looking at battery production and how we dispose of batteries as we're moving to more electric kinds of systems in energy production. What are we doing with the waste? Every kind of energy that we produce has some waste, and the battery piece is there. There's also some concern about brownouts. And as we move from a more fossil fuel-based way of generating our power to a more electric way of generating our power, or other things we haven't thought of, are we going to experience some problems with the system in the meantime? And then one of my favorites, and one of Mark's favorites, deals with the lawnmowers and weed whackers and all the things that we power out in our yards. And can we have those power equipment be less polluting in the area? So there's the broad range. Monday is the fiscal cutoff. So that would be committees out, bills coming out of fiscal committees. After that, next week, I will update the tracker after I've crossed all those bills off, and we'll send that out to the council and our policy board. So I'm happy to answer questions, and that was a lot, but we're looking at a lot of things.
Good. You've got John O'Callahan.
One of the things I haven't heard you talk about, and I haven't been following what's going up on the Hill, but we are moving into more electric vehicles. For example, over at the bus barn, there's a whole bunch of smaller cars, never mind some of the buses that are getting plugged in every night. Is there any talk of strengthening our electrical grid?
Yes, there's lots of conversations about that. I didn't specifically mention it, but we are looking at where chargers are located and who pays for them. We are looking at the whole grid itself and saying, we can't support all these chargers. So what conversations are we having? So there's a handful of bills around that. I didn't go into the specifics of all the bills that deal with the climate change work that we are doing, but yes, strengthening the grid is out there as a conversation.
One other thing I'd mention briefly on that is the Washington State Transportation Commission had devoted quite a bit of time at their meeting yesterday on vehicle user charge and switching to a vehicle user charge system. And with that, there is a lot of discussion about electrification of the transportation system. That's one of the reasons that they're looking at that potential switch. And there are bills related to that switch away from a gas tax to a vehicle user charge as well. And we're keeping track of those. And if there are any changes, we'll be sure to bring them back to you.
Thank you. Mark, is there a possibility that after session we can get some kind of understanding of what they're looking at as far as the miles per?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We'll get an update.
Yeah, because it's been, what, about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago since last time. And from what I understand, they're still not looking at anything more than about a 2.5 cent per mile type deal. And back then I said it did sound like it would even cover paper clips for the administration side.
Yes, and I think the focus this session, while it's still out there, has been this idea of we have excess money here. Can we move it over here?
I'm sorry.
Well, you know, no one wants to increase taxes. So do we have some short-term answers that we can deal with while we're waiting? So I'm not being cynical, but we are, you know, the legislature is very interested in finding solutions that have less impact on the population.
Thank
All
you.
right. We've got a couple more minutes. Chris?
3 quick points. I want to thank the county for bringing together a broadband action team, which is required by legislation to help get as much fiber out to undeveloped areas as possible. The tribes have been working on this. So is the PUD. We're still at the point of doing proposal either late winter or early spring. Hasn't come together yet. But the second thing I want to point out to Karen is we have a new legislative district in our county, the 19th. And I'm wondering if there's been any outreach to those legislators, many of whom are new. I think the longest serving one is 4 years. So that would be an important thing to do. And finally, just on the climate change and electrification issue, I just found out that Whatcom County has a fuel cell passenger ferry people that are building such things up there, and it's called All American Marine, and they're in Whatcom County, and they're building fuel cell passenger ferries. That's not for cars, just people. But we've often talked about the mosquito fleet idea and you know, the ports being involved with that. Here we've got somebody producing those vehicles here in our state, brand new, that uses hydrogen technology. Might be something to investigate further as a mode of transportation northwards.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
That brings up for me also the conversation as we're looking at hydrogen powered vehicles, as we're looking at electric vehicles, as we're looking at this variety of ways. I feel like I need to say this out loud because I have to keep reminding myself. Buying a new type of fuel vehicle for your home use or personal use is very different than converting a fleet. And so when you're looking at transit, when you're looking at the school transit fleet, when you're looking at a ferry fleet, recognizing that you are retooling your whole organization to deal with this, that if I make a mistake when I buy things, it's going to impact my personal economy, but it's not going to put my whole foundation of my organization at risk. And so I think that's important recognition that is happening, that individual decisions are very different than fleet decisions. And it feels like it goes without saying, but I'm hearing more and more people saying, I need to say this out loud. And so I think that's going to be part of the conversation continuing.
Great. We've got Gary Edwards and Michael Cade, and then we'll need to move on.
Okay, just real quick, Karen. You say, you know, something that somebody might be talking about, talk out loud. Is the word nuclear ever mentioned when you're talking about the grid up there, when folks are discussing it?
It's not been mentioned much at the state level. I think we still sort of have that whoops, which was the nuclear piece in the memory of this state. But we are paying attention, and certainly it comes up in conversation. I don't see any specific bills this session, although we saw some last session about it. So it's still out there as a possibility, especially if we have learned some lessons about dealing with waste and safety. Those are some of the issues.
Okay, thank you.
There are some 60 megawatt miniature nuclear plants suggested by the Tri-Cities area, which has always been a very strong pro-nuclear area because that's where Hanford is. And they've had a study group work on it, and that's as far as I know it's gotten so far.
Hey, Chris,
Mhm.
is that, don't they use those in Europe quite a bit?
The plant is a proven design because it's used on the nuclear submarines, mostly the attack submarines, not the Tridents. But it's a smaller size, and it also doesn't have the valves that wear out on bigger plants, so it automatically shuts down if there's a problem. It's designed to shut down. So it's much safer in many certain aspects. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Michael, did you have a legislative comment?
No, I had just a comment about Chris's and the electric boats, but Bass, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right. Karen, thank you for this update. And we'll be much farther along in the session next month when we hear from you. All right. Next up is outside committee reports. Joe, have you, go ahead, Mark.
Well, and so this is when we would normally hear from Helen Wheatley, who's representing, who's attending the Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board meetings. She has been, but she let me know she wouldn't be at this meeting today.
Good, then I won't put Joe as the alternate on the spot to ask him if he knows about that. We'll just keep moving along here. All right, so next up is the report from the executive director. Mark.
I do have a few things. One, with a lot of changes to our members' boards and councils, there are a lot of new elected leaders in our region. And so I'm really hoping, it's been difficult to get on a lot of your agendas over the past year or so, just because everything has been very, very busy. But I'll be reaching out and hopefully can start getting an opportunity to update your boards and councils on some of the work that, briefly who we are, what we do, and some of the key pieces of work that would be pertinent to your boards and councils, so that your whole organization gets a better sense of who we are and what we do. So hopefully you'll be seeing me in front of your boards and councils in the not too distant future, if your agendas allow that. But I know that has been challenging. So also, if you can put in a good word for giving me a few minutes on your agenda, that would be great too. For new members to council, if Berlina Lucas hasn't reached out to you already, she will be, to set up a one-on-one with me. At new members, I would like to get an opportunity to sit down and give an overview of the organization of council, and also just a chance for me to chat one-on-one with each person. So if you're new and you haven't received that request yet from Berlina, you will soon. And lastly, wanted to talk about the federal infrastructure package just a little bit, get a lot of questions about what's going on with that. We're tracking it closely. We've heard from the state that they've heard from the feds that the date keeps getting a little bit pushed out on when we're going to get some more information on how the infrastructure funds are going to flow to the states and through what programs. But I also just want to say briefly that this is why it's so important, and I appreciate that our council has prioritized planning and developing our work, because that puts us in good stead when these opportunities come up. Because the one thing that we have heard pretty consistently from the feds is this is a 5-year funding package, and they're looking to get all those funds under contract within that 5-year period. And so when those funds start moving, they're going to move quickly. And because of the decisions you all have made, we hope to be in good position to compete for some of those funds that we know are going to come competitively out nationwide, excuse me. So that's what I've got. Thank you, Chair. Oh, and also I just want to briefly say thank you to Clark Gilman for chairing this meeting today. And thank you to Dennis McVeigh for chairing our last month's meeting while we until we elected our new officers for 2022. Great job and much appreciated.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mark. So the next item during this COVID time, we've been running some member sharing to get updates from members on what's going on in their jurisdictions. And I'm wondering if this morning we might start with giving Hillary and Joe each an opportunity, because we didn't have any speaking role during the election. That was quick and efficient. But would you two like to kick off the member sharing this morning? Hillary, would you be up for that?
Yeah, Joe, do you want to go first, or I can go first?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm deeply appreciative of the trust of the members. And I think most of you know that I really support this mission of TRPC to provide visionary leadership and provide us all with an opportunity to work collaboratively for the benefit of our shared community. I think a big reason I ran for public office was I wanted to be able to build better collaboration between government entities, which are still pretty siloed, but I think we are doing better work together. And I think that TRPC is really a great vehicle for that and has been at the forefront of spearheading a lot of that collaboration, most notably through a lot of the transportation projects, but also through the wonderful work that's been done around climate change mitigation. So I hope to collaborate with staff and lead the organization continuing in that direction. And my other comment will be, don't forget to vote on Tuesday, because many of your communities and your schools have special initiatives on the ballot. And I would remind you that the things that they're asking you for are things that usually sit out of regular school funding. So computers for kids, if we need to make online learning accessible, and in the absence of universal broadband, also supplementing families' access to the internet. And now I will hand it to Joe.
Thanks, Hillary. For those who don't know me, my name's Joe. I'm the new mayor of Yelm. I'm very happy to be on this board as secretary and give a voice to South County and some of the smaller communities in this region. For the city of Yelm, what we've been doing so far right now in my first month as mayor, we've been signing contracts with our local unions, our Teamsters. We're starting up with the FOP, the Fraternal Order Police, and then we're going to AFSCME here in shortly, next month, a couple weeks actually. So we're getting busy with that. We've got water rights coming up. It's been officially submitted. It's been a long process. It's been like over a decade, and I'm just fortunate enough to be the mayor that is overseeing a lot of this, and we're pushing for them to finish up so we can start more development here in the city of Yelm as we grow and all that. And other than that, we got a dog park coming up. We're building our first one in Yelm, so that's cool. Gives a lot of citizens, especially low-income citizens that don't necessarily live in apartments or duplex, or triplex, or whatever, that don't necessarily have a yard for their pets to go around. This gives them a nice amenity. And instead of driving out to Lacey or wherever to go to a dog park. So this is great. Other than that, looking forward to working with y'all, and that's it.
Terrific. And let's open it up for a few minutes. What other updates do we have from the great state of Tenino?
There you go. We just got promoted, didn't we? On September 10th, we'll be having, I think it's the 7th First Responders Potluck Barbecue. It's a free event. Just mark it on your calendar and I'll bring you more information as that comes around. Also, I'm the chairman of the Thurston County Fire Association, Fire Commissioners Association. One of the things, some of you know, I'm from New York. Back east, we have a fireman's ball. I'm hoping to go back east and talk with some contacts back there to get a better understanding of how to make that work and bring that here. The reason that I brought it up to the membership was to put together some kind of a charity type thing. We haven't made a decision on that. I lean personally very heavy to setting up a scholarship program for the children of our firefighters, but time will tell. Hopefully we'll have our first fireman's ball next year sometime. Thank you.
Super news. Who else has an update for us? Well, there we go. Cheryl, tell us about the libraries, and then we've got Robin right behind you. All right, from Lacey.
Thank you, Clark. Wanted to let you know that the 29th library is opening. The grand opening of the Hawks Prairie Timberland Library will be on Friday, February 18th at 10 a.m. Wanted to remind everyone that this is a demonstration library, which means that we've signed a lease for 3 years, and it began last fall. This demonstration library is also has a popular high demand collection. So it's not like the collection at the Lacey Timberland Library or other libraries. And so you're all invited to that. And it's at 8205 Martin Way, Suite B, and it's on the Intercity Transit bus line. Wanted to also let you know that the 28th new library at Capitol Mall now ranks number 7 in terms of physical circulation in the whole district. Wanted to also let you know that's also a demonstration library, and that's a 2-year lease. We are back to 2019 physical circulation numbers, which is really great to know. Wanted to let you know that we are partnering with Energy Northwest, and we just signed the agreement yesterday to install 2 electrical vehicle charging stations at the Salcombe Timberland Library. They are also very interested in looking at other of our libraries, both in Lewis County and in Mason and so on. So I'm sure that they would be interested in Thurston. Wanted to also let you know that our digital usage increased by 12% from 2020 to 2021, which is huge. And we have set aside additional funds for digital online resources. And as a reminder to existing council members and the new members, all the school districts in Thurston County are participating with Timberland Regional Library with a MyTRL program, which means that all students K through 12 in all the school districts have an e-number in their Skyward software account to access all these digital online resources. That's it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Robin.
I was actually going to report out on that. I'm very excited about that new library branch opening in North Lacey. Yeah, February 18th. The other thing is that at our council meeting yesterday, we approved moving forward with securing design for phase 1A of the Greg Cuyo Park master plan. So we're hoping to have portions of the Greg Cuyo Park open by, I think, sometime in 2024. So the timeline for getting design and securing funding and actually doing the development is lengthy, but we're moving and it's very exciting. There's several different phases of the project, so we're just talking about 1A right now, but we want to get it going.
Great, and we want to recognize this is Carolyn's last meeting as the Intercity Transit rep, although who knows how she might show up in the future, I hope. So what's cooking at IT?
Well, I wanted to, usually we're talking about bus routes and, adding or reducing service, but I wanted to just take a minute and recognize a few people who have gone out of their way to literally save lives at Intercity Transit. Earlier in January, 2 of our drivers, Paul Tischer and Ted DePoe, performed CPR on a man who had stopped breathing at Capitol Mall and literally saved his life. More recently, another bus driver named Leanna Roberts saw a woman who looked as if she was going to be jumping off the overpass at Slater-Kinney and I-5, and she talked her down and brought her back to safety. These are, examples of real heroism here, but I can tell you after spending 4 years with Intercity Transit that this is an agency filled with everyday heroes. They were standing by to evacuate people in the flooding. They transport our homeless individuals when there's extreme weather. Just things that you don't hear about very often, but I think we all just need to take a beat and recognize what a treasure intercity transit is to our community. So thank you. And I hope this won't be the last you see of me, but it's been a real pleasure being part of this agency.
Commissioner Ayala.
Thank you. As one of the newcomers, I felt I ought to just speak up a little bit and give a quick update from the Port of Olympia. At the port, we are getting ready to launch into updating and reviewing and revising and updating our strategic plan. Because of this conversation here today, I was able to look up some information on the hydrogen fuel cell powered ferry. And so I'm certain that will be a part of our strategic planning discussion. So thank you for that. Just one project I know that we have coming up this year in the next few months. We do have a solar project. Solar panels will be going on the farmers market downtown. And it's just a pleasure to be a part of the meeting here. And thanks for having me.
Terrific. Well, if there are no other hands up right now, maybe we should give ourselves the gift of time and take these 15 minutes and pretend the meeting kept going so you don't have to go back to work. You stretch for a minute. Well, with no other business before us, we will adjourn the meeting of the Thurston Regional Planning Council until the March meeting, where we'll have a new chairperson. All right.
Undebatable motion.
There you go.
Thank
you all. The meeting's adjourned. Bye-bye.
Bye. You all have a good day.